My goodness, you're a very responsive crowd. Tell you to sit down, everyone goes quiet, but I can guarantee you the next hour will not be a quiet hour. This is going to be a real treat for all of us this morning. My name is Tom Coughlin. I teach at MIT in the Sloan School of Management, do research on work in employment relations, but my real claim to fame is all the good work that Jody does. She was a student of ours at MIT, and this is just wonderful to see how this relational coordination network and all of the research and the activity and the energy that I've been able to observe over time now has grown to this level. So welcome to Cambridge and to this great session. And it's really my great opportunity to introduce my good friend and colleague, Phil Thompson, who is, if anything else I can predict, is going to wake you up, shake you up, and get you ready to do something constructive. And that's going to really be the theme. Not just to listen to Phil, but to, as you sit there, ask yourselves, and maybe at your table, when we have a chance, what is it that we can do to take all of the lessons of relational coordination to the level of social activism, of progress, of speaking to social justice, which obviously today for sure, but in our time is so critical to our lives and to future generations. So that's what we're going to hear from Phil. He's going to bring his experience as one of the nation's premier social activists and academics in urban planning, and now in his role in New York City to bear in this conversation. So his keynote speech is titled Social Movements and Building a New Economy. Phil is the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives in New York City, appointed by Mayor de Blasio in February of this year. In that capacity, he oversees just what it sounds like, the really key initiatives of the city and of the mayor and of the administration. One of the things that I'm really excited about is his oversight of the pre-K program, which is one of the best, most comprehensive in the country for 4-year-olds, maybe soon 3-year-olds if things move forward in a positive way, but also works on women and minority-owned businesses and on ways to bring more young people and people of color into the voting process, into the political participation process. And this really reflects what Phil has done throughout his career. He's also a colleague of ours in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT, where he has focused on housing issues, on civic engagement, on responding to crises, whether it's environmental crises in Colombia or post-Katrina training for people to rebuild New Orleans, or working in Haiti after the earthquake. Phil is someone that people call on when they need a good organizer, a good facilitator, a good inspirational leader, and someone who knows how to get things done. I think that's maybe why the mayor called you back to New York, Phil. I'm not sure about that, but I suspect that had something to do with it. Phil has worked in the city of New York in the past for previous administrations on various issues, on different commissions on community development. His undergraduate degree is from here at Harvard. His master's degree is at Hunter College. And then his PhD is at the City University in New York. So he's really a man of action. He's a man of ideas. He wrote a really interesting book. I write very boring books with very boring titles. I love this one. It's called Double Trouble: Black Mayors, Black Communities, and the Struggle for Deep Democracy. So that speaks to his values, to his work over the years. We are fortunate to have Phil here. He's going to elevate this conversation, and I know he's going to challenge you. So, Phil, thank you for being here, and look forward to your comments. And then, as I said, you have a homework assignment while you sit there, thinking about what does this mean to relational coordination? How do we bring it to the level of activism that Phil's going to talk about? So, it's all yours, Phil. Thanks.
Well, that's a hell of an introduction. Thank you. Let's see what So I also just want to confess, Jody Hoffer-Patel is, we've been friends for decades. And Tom and I are, you know, we also share a passion for labor. And Jody's mother-in-law was the woman who convinced me to go get a PhD, and was my mentor. And her husband and I have written together, and you know, we're like family. So I just want to be honest about that. I know that some of you are not from the U.S., so I just want to begin by relating a couple of quick facts about New York. New York City. Things you may not know. In 1980, the city's population was about 48% persons of color. Asian, African American or African diasporic, Latino. Today, New York City is about 70% people of color. So, you know, a lot of people just go to Manhattan, you know, tourists, and they don't really get around the city, but the city is, you know, is a very diverse place. Nearly half of the city's workforce is composed of immigrants. In 1980, the share of total income held by the richest 1% of city residents was 12%. Today, the richest 1% earn 41% of all income in the city. So New York is a very unequal city, and it has become dramatically more unequal over the last several decades, dramatically. 30% of the city's children live in poverty, and while we are known for glitz and innovation and music and entertainment and Wall Street and technology, and all of that is true, we also have more poor people than the city of Philadelphia or the city of Phoenix has residents in New York. We are struggling with several large overarching problems that I want to mention today. One is the issue of health, and I know many of you work in health, and also including mental health. Our U.S. Senator Gillibrand, recently said, quote, "Our state has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the country, and our country has the highest maternal mortality rate in the industrialized world. It's even worse for black women, who are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women. In New York City, black women are 12 times more likely to die as a result of pregnancy and childbirth. This is completely unacceptable and largely avoidable, and it's a crisis that we can and must solve now," end quote. She's right. New York State spends more than $60 billion a year on Medicaid, which is health insurance for low-income people. Much of that money is spent in New York City, yet health outcomes are not improving. In fact, maternal health is getting worse each year. Why is this? We know that the leading cause of poor health outcomes have to do with the social determinants of health. Things like unemployment, lack of stable housing, crime, rats. I met recently with the public housing leaders of northern Manhattan, and I asked them, what is the biggest issue for you? And they said rats and raccoons. They're not joking, raccoons. They've spread out from Central Park and have moved into public housing. Rats and raccoons. Mold, bad food, all these things lead to stress, heart disease, asthma, and cancer. We know that addressing social determinants of health will keep people out of hospitals and reduce the cost of healthcare. So why aren't we instituting full employment and affordable housing as public health measures, as a way of holding down the cost of so many heart attacks and emergency room visits? I think we have problems at 3 levels here. First, Medicaid statisticians and bureaucrats don't know how to measure the impact of programs that address social determinants of health. And they assess programs in terms of individual health outcomes. It's probably impossible to measure the impact of better food separately from stable housing, separately from employment, separately from having better community relations with the police, and so on, so as to be able to say definitively, this program had this impact on health, and so Medicaid says we don't pay for these things, because we need evidence of impact, but the way they measure impact and evidence doesn't allow actually to measure social determinants of health, or to include social determinants of health. So that's one problem. Second, managed care companies, and that's how Medicaid is provided. Managed care companies don't know how to address social determinants of health. Neither do hospital administrators. Hospital administrators are trained to fill hospital beds the same way restaurant owners are trained to fill restaurant tables, and a hospital's fiscal health is better when the beds are full. Just like a restaurant's fiscal health is better when the tables are full. And so hospital administrators are not trained on how to keep people out of hospitals. That's not their business. So they don't know how to address social determinants, and many managed care companies are skeptical that it's even possible to change social trends. So they don't try to change their business models to try and address social issues. Third, and I think most important, the unions representing healthcare workers and Medicaid recipients themselves are mainly silent in the healthcare debate. There was no organization representing Medicaid recipients in the entire United States. 1 in 3 people in New York State is on Medicaid. There's no organization in the entire country that represents Medicaid recipients. They have no voice. Unions have historically perceived themselves in the United States as defensive organizations. They fight for workers' wages and benefits, but they don't try to shape the nature of industry itself. So unions don't advocate for a community-based, social determinants-focused, preventative healthcare system. Mainly, they try to protect the hospital jobs they already have, which implies keeping hospitals full of people. It's not unlike the coal industry in the US and the United Mine Workers. Everyone kind of says we need to move away from coal, but the mine workers are like, no, we need coal, because those are jobs. And they haven't really imagined or can see how they transition from coal, their members, into something else. And it's similar in healthcare. I think this third issue is the most important one, and I'm going to return to it later. We have an even tougher problem with mental health. 8% of students in NYC public schools attempt suicide before they graduate high school. 8% attempt suicide. That means more than 85,000 young people attempt suicide before they graduate high school. The First Lady of New York, her name is Chirlane McCray, has spearheaded a citywide mental health initiative called Thrive. It's one of the things I oversee. Thrive has touched a nerve in the city. Hundreds of thousands of people have called Thrive's mental health hotline seeking assistance. Tens of thousands of people have taken training in mental health first aid, it's called. We have more than 65 programs operating now addressing mental health, but the demand is just overwhelming. Schools and communities are all asking for help. Thrive's value is obvious. It costs about $1 billion a year in city tax levy funds. And we're just really scratching the surface. Yet little of this work is eligible for federal reimbursement under Medicaid or other health programs. Why? Again, there's a measurement problem. While there are serious individual mental health conditions rooted in biological imbalances that are best treated by doctors, and the effects of drugs and other treatments on these individuals can be measured, and those kinds of things are reimbursable. The bigger problem is social emotional distress. That's the broader, bigger problem. The solutions for social emotional issues lie in our social interactions. Like, do kids bully or tease other kids in school? Do we ostracize gay and lesbian and transgender young people? Do we support yellow cab drivers? People who had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a medallion to drive a cab, who are now being undermined totally by Uber and Lyft, and their medallions are worthless, yet they're deep in debt. This year, many cab drivers committed suicide in New York City. One of them committed suicide at City Hall. And so on. These are social interactions that cause stress. The social-emotional challenge is broad and requires interventions at many levels. Yet this is precisely, again, the problem for Medicaid bureaucrats. How do you know which intervention improved mental health outcomes? What exactly keeps a teenager from not attempting suicide? How do you prove that? Yet the problem isn't just measurement. It's not even mainly measurement. There's a more profound problem here. Why are our federal health programs limited to individual interventions that are discretely measurable in the first place? Why do we not as a nation fund programs aimed at our social well-being as a whole? Like community engagement and inclusive discussion groups. Like anti-bullying initiatives that are nationwide. Or anti-sexual harassment trainings for the whole nation, starting with the White House. Or anti-racist programs for all schools. Or training on non-stigmatizing of poor people, or non-stigmatizing of immigrants. Why don't we do these things? These kinds of interventions would reduce social emotional distress, reduce stress-related diseases, and bring down our healthcare costs. So why aren't we doing it? We appear to be incapable of thinking or acting for society as a whole. Our imagination appears to be captive to microeconomic thinking, as if society and community don't matter. The pioneering black social psychologist Kenneth Clark addressed this issue in the 1960s. He said, while he was head of the American Psychological Association, that the United States lacks empathy. In fact, he said, our culture in the United States is clinically ill. Clark used Hiroshima and Nagasaki as an example. He said Americans didn't express remorse or anxiety about killing, literally incinerating 250,000 innocent Japanese women and children while using the atom bomb. We didn't anguish over that. He said that's actually sick. Clark is the same psychologist who did the famous doll test used in the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case over racial segregation of schools. He showed that black girls by age 12 developed negative images of themselves. They rejected black dolls, only wanted white dolls. He said they didn't like their bodies and wanted to be white. He argued then that internalized racism incapacitates black people for life, as it is internalized hatred of oneself. Many black scholars and activists have long said that slavery and segregation undermine our nation's ability to think of ourselves as one people, as one society. It destroyed our sense of common humanity, and thereby our will to cooperate and help one another. I thought about this recently when my staff was notified secretly. I oversee immigration in New York. And workers who were contracted by the federal government to take care of children separated from their parents at the Mexican border, 350 of them were secretly moved into New York City, and workers who worked at these agencies contacted us secretly because they were risking their jobs to tell us what was going on. And we sent our health department, we sent lawyers, we sent people to go see what was going on with these 350 children. They were between 9 months and 10 years old, and the agencies taking care of them actually were accustomed to taking care of teenagers who crossed the border, who came from Guatemala and El Salvador on their own, but they were teenagers. They were not equipped or trained to take care of babies, of toddlers. They were told, you're not allowed to hold one of the children. You can't hold them. So you're talking about a 9-month-old. You can't hold the 9-month-old. You can't hold the 1-year-old toddler. The kids were sleeping on beds with bed bugs. The kids were eating bad food, rotten food. The kids had no blankets, had no dolls, no effective objects. So our staff ran around at night going to stores trying to buy blankets and dolls. Our health department did training for the workers on how to take care of babies and toddlers. Our commissioner of immigration cried at the city council here, describing the work they were doing. And it begs the question, what kind of a nation does this to babies? I have, my son's actually, we have an adopted son. He was too old to be legally adopted, but he's been in our house for 7 years, so he's adopted. And my two biological sons moved him in our house. Freshman year in college, he dropped out of college after 1 semester because he was $21,000 in debt. Tuition went up midway through the school year, he couldn't pay. Went up $4,000, he dropped out. So my kids moved him in our house. And This is a young man who saw his mother die in a bathtub when he was 12. And she had mental illness, and she died. He didn't know who his dad was. And he had been in 16 foster homes. And when he saw what was happening with the children being separated from the border, he just went into a tailspin. Because he said, social services came into his household. His mother was struggling with mental illness, was having financial problems, and social services took him and his two sisters away from his mother, put them in 3 different foster homes. He lost contact with his family, you know, and he was in 16 different homes. And he said, watching what was going on with his kids just brought all this back to him, and he was really struggling. And he pointed out to me, we do this all the time. Who was in foster care? These are poor people, black and brown kids. And instead of helping the mother, helping the family, often we just go in and take the kids, leave the mother, put the kids here and there, and they're traumatized. So where do we draw the line between helping a mother and taking her children away? Something we struggle with. How do we decide these things? I want to touch quickly on a couple of other challenges we have. Tom mentioned Mayor de Blasio launched an initiative in his first term called Universal Pre-K. 70,000 kids plus are now 4-year-olds are now in preschool. And it's free, it's quality, it's great. Right, we just launched this year universal, public, free school, preschool for 3-year-olds. And I think we have about 30,000 now so far, and it's growing. We're building up that program, and we think pretty soon, next year or so, it'll be another 70,000 or more. And I gotta tell you, few things have moved me more. Few things I enjoy more than going, like the mayor, the school's chancellor, Richard Carranza, and I went to a 3K opening, and the 3-year-olds, we all sat down. The mayor's like 6'6". We all sat down, and the 3-year-olds had a tea party for us. And, you know, the kids are like learning how to work together, and it's just great. And the mothers testified. One mother said, you know, I was working a second job in order to pay for private preschool for my 3-year-old because I want my child to have a better life than I do. But it costs $2,000 a month. For an ordinary working, this mother was in the Bronx, that's her whole salary. So she took a second full-time job so her 3-year-old could be in pre-K, could have an opportunity. And now, because the city has created this program, she's able to go to community college and actually work and prepare herself for a different kind of job. She's actually able to like lift herself up. And that's something she couldn't imagine before. And I've just heard many stories like that. So having something like this in place is just life-changing for many people. We also have community schools, and I oversee the community school program. We have 225 community schools. We have 120,000 students, and we're expanding. We now have another 100,000 students who live in transitional housing who are part of that. That means homeless shelters and other kinds of transitional housing. And so it's a big program. And the idea of community schools is to engage neighborhood organizations in helping students and the families of students. They have programs after school, not only for the kids, but also for the parents, many of whom need English as a second language, English training in English or basic education and training so they can get their high school equivalency degree and so on. And the idea is to take a comprehensive approach to the life of the child, family, and community. Both pre-K and community schools are trying to address a huge problem. and that is that the economy is being increasingly driven by technology. Education and training are the keys to success in this new economy, yet most of our young people are on the losing end in New York City. If you look at African American males, only 12% graduate high school college ready in New York. And if you ask how many of those are STEM ready, you're probably in the 1% range. And so this is where the economy is going, but that's not where our kids are going. This is in no way good. I would say it's dangerous. However, the city is paying for pre-K and community schools largely on its own dime. It's a testament to our city and our mayor, but most cities couldn't afford to do what we do. Most cities don't have Wall Street, and they aren't able to tax that wealthy 1%. Most cities couldn't do what we do. And after Mayor de Blasio, or if the city has an economic downturn, it's unclear if such programs will survive. We should be addressing and funding these kinds of programs at the federal level, but we are not, to say the least. Here's another practical issue we face. How can we connect what we want to do in preventative health with what we are trying to do with community schools? We are dealing with the same families and same communities, but with giant bureaucratic systems that are mostly disconnected from each other. Here again, our giant systems do not recognize the social context. Literally, that we're engaging same people. We want residents to come to PTA meetings, this is the school department. We want them to come to community health forums, that's the health department. We want them to go to neighborhood policing meetings, that's the police department. While people are already stressed, overburdened, and at wit's end, how can people be expected to do all this? The third and final issue I want to put forward quickly is real estate or land. And I'm throwing a lot of things at you because this is what it's like. These issues don't come parsed out. You can do one, forget about the no. So why should you be happy? The third and final issue I want to put forward is real estate or land. And I want to discuss real estate in relation to housing affordability and climate change really quick. The environmentalists tell us that urban sprawl is hugely wasteful, carbon intensive, and destructive of green organisms like trees we need to survive. We should all live in cities, they say. But cities have finite land. And if the land is privately owned, as it mostly is, and public policy is trying to make cities more dense, as we are, then the owners of the land have quite a monopoly. Landowners can just keep jacking up the price of real estate. If we put more money, government money, into housing subsidies for the poor, landowners can just suck it up. They can just raise rents. This is actually what's happening. Clearly, we need some kind of forceful land regulation, putting the social good, and here we're talking about survival of the human species, above individual land rights. But this is going to be a hell of a fight in the US, because social things pretty much don't have a constituency in the US. We have a problem. Related to this is the fact that New York City has 500 miles of coastline and the oceans are rising. We are seriously discussing what to do about that, but we're going to have to take forceful action. We're also about to lose 25% of our energy because the Indian Point nuclear plant is shutting down in 3 years, which is like that. We are thinking about compelling private building owners to have to retrofit their buildings for energy efficiency, to reduce the demand for energy so we can cope. However, we're going to face all kinds of resistance on this. Here again, the fight will be between social good versus individual property rights. I want to shift now quickly into what one community is doing to address some of these problems, and just to, connect with some of the things you're thinking about, talking about today. The community is called Brownsville in central Brooklyn. Brownsville is one of the poorest communities in New York, some of the worst health, crime, education, and employment outcomes. But Brownsville residents are acting. A few years ago, the residents of Brownsville, many of them community groups, united with workers at a hospital the state was about to close, and they demanded that the state keep the hospital open, and they created their own community health improvement plan. And the governor, they organized the electeds, the churches, the unions, and the governor, when he faced everyone united, caved in, kept the hospital open, and not only kept the hospital open, he acceded to the community's demand for control over the hospitals in the neighborhood. So the community won control of 3 large hospitals, and they appointed the first ever, the community and labor coalition, the first ever African-American woman head of a hospital in the history of New York State, Dr. LaRae Brown. She's now head of 3 hospitals in central Brooklyn. It's called One Brooklyn. And the governor took the community's plan and renamed it the Vital Brooklyn Plan, and he committed $1.4 billion to the Vital Brooklyn Plan. Now, we haven't seen the money. We've seen a number of press conferences, particularly when he was running for re-election. We're looking for the money, but we do have the hospital. So, Brownsville's also creating many innovative programs. I'll mention a couple. There was a community kitchen called the Harvest Culinary Kitchen. It was founded by a former divinity school professor who became a restaurant entrepreneur who decided to combine his interest in restaurants and his commitment as a theologian to open a community kitchen restaurant in Brownsville that's also a job training program. And so far they've trained 200 at-risk youth in the restaurant business and placed them in jobs all around the city. The restaurant serves healthy food, and they surveyed the community in Brownsville to find out why so many people ate fast food, like at McDonald's. And what they found out was that parents don't have time to cook. So they came up with the idea of preparing ready-to-eat meals and delivering them to people's houses. The local community board, which is, New York has a system of community boards, got together with our city's health department, who joined with them, and they got 139 bodegas, which are small corner stores, in the neighborhood to agree to stock the ready-to-eat meals in their bodegas. So now they're going to create more jobs cooking and distributing healthy food. So it's a public health measure, it's a workforce measure, and so on. Another initiative is getting the local hospitals to buy food from local producers, and there happens to be a company called FSP right in the neighborhood that employs 100 workers, and they supply 26,000 meals a day to some hospitals. And so now they're looking to expand that, and the school's chancellor wants to say, well, New York City schools serve 190 million meals a year, so how can we leverage that to actually buy food from local producers and create jobs in the neighborhood and so on? Saturday, I'm going to Mondragon, Spain, because the hospitals went over there and saw a worker-owned factory that makes hospital furniture, and they're saying, we want that in Brooklyn, and then we'll buy our furniture from the local factory, and that will employ kids who are coming out of Rikers Island prison in productive jobs, create a future for them. And so, I'm going there this weekend. These are things that have come out of the Brownsville Initiative, and I just want to really quickly show you their planning one of their planning documents. So here's the work groups they have: equity planning, resident planning, city services planning, fiscal policy planning. Do you see the word planning? So they are actually coming together and planning. Here's what they define as their priorities. They didn't read your stuff. They came up with coordination all by themselves. But you notice, They put equity right up there at the top line with coordination. To them, the two things go together. Coordination for what? For equity. And you see how they connect health and wellness, economic development, housing, and quality. Coordinate residents and agencies to eliminate barriers and address inequalities to improve the overall health of the community. Develop a shared understanding of people. Really, agency. Support the community in actually determining priorities for the neighborhood and policies. That they go to agencies and say, here are our priorities. They just don't sit back and listen to bureaucrats say what the priorities of the agencies are. I'm going to skip through this. They have a bunch of strategies. Here's the Vital Brooklyn thing that the governor stole. This is actually the governor's slideshow that he built off of the community's plan, his Vital Brooklyn. He now calls it his Vital Brooklyn Initiative. But we're like, if you put $1 billion in it, you can own it, call it yours, say it was your baby. So one of the things they emphasize is that their initiative eliminates duplication, inefficiencies, and gaps. It actually brings more effectiveness to all the policies that government has, and it actually, we argue that we actually don't necessarily need more government money and programs. We need to make better use and intelligent use of what we have, because right now a lot of it is inefficient, wasted. One thing they didn't put in their, I'll stop here. One of the things they didn't put in there is that they also are doing political empowerment. And I don't mean like in a political party sense. I mean, they come up with an agenda, they call in all the elected officials, they have the unions at the table and everyone else, and they say this is what we want. And the electeds do not push back. What they say, in fact, is thank you, because now we know we have something to do in these committees we sit on. You know, we actually have an agenda that we know will make a difference, and they feel better being able to actually do something in sync with the community. I call these kinds of activities building civic infrastructure. And earlier I said that the biggest problem is actually unions and lack of agency of Medicaid recipients themselves. This is building agency from the grassroots level up. The main healthcare workers union in New York is 1199. They have 87,000 members in central Brooklyn. But their members have not been engaged in policy discussions or understanding how their union can be a force for change in the healthcare system that will benefit their community and their families. But here they are being drawn into that, along with other community residents, and eventually that's going to redirect the union. It's going to redirect a bunch of unions. But it's this kind of work that actually does that. Last thing I want to say is part of my job is working on a larger vision for policy, and the larger vision I promote is economic democracy. It's a little different from social democracy. I know we have people from Scandinavia here. It's not about building more big government bureaucracy to replace big corporate bureaucracy. It's not about bringing big government, big corporate, and big labor bureaucracies in a room to cut mega deals. It is about democratizing our private sector, not diminishing it. This means creating more opportunities for the kind of business development emerging in Brownsville. Government's role, in my view, is to actively promote democracy in all spheres of life, including the economy. It means that government needs a substantive, animating vision, not unlike those the Brownsville residents are creating. It means we need a government that sees itself creating thriving, healthy communities, and not just ensuring formal equality, you know, in the law, like voting, the right to vote. Great, we want that. Can't take it for granted these days, you know, but that's a starting point for democracy and equality. That's not the end point. Government needs to enable local initiatives and innovation among all communities, meaning that all communities and all kids should have an opportunity to thrive and create startups and other things in the new tech economy. Not only the lucky kids who get into a Harvard or an MIT or some institution like that. I see relational coordination in this context. To me, it's part of empowering people within anti-democratic hierarchical structures and unleashing human creativity, human sensitivity, and here is something I would like your discipline to consider: human capacities for empathy and love into our various organizational systems. I think the latter is essential. We cannot tackle our social problems that I mentioned from the standpoint of self-interest, hatred of others, and segregation of others. We cannot change our dysfunctional programs, organizations, and policies in health, education, housing, or the environment without taking on these social problems. Creating something bottom-up and human-centered has to be motivated by something. They put equity up there with coordination. I want to say a word here about Adam Smith. Adam Smith thought we could take what was bad about human nature, our greed and selfishness, and turn it into something good that fostered equality and democracy. This is what he meant by invisible hand. Adam Smith was not a conservative. Adam Smith said that market society would free workers from, quote, servile dependency upon their superiors, end quote. Smith believed that market society would not breed selfishness, but encourage concern for the welfare of others. He said, quote, all for ourselves and nothing for other people seems, in every age of the world, to have been the vile maxim of the masters of mankind, end quote. Capitalism, Adam Smith believed, would make people less selfish and more generous, invisible. The anti-slavery abolitionists, including leaders like Abraham Lincoln, had many of the same hopes. But abolitionists promoted cooperative businesses as an alternative to slavery of any kind, as the key for building a democratic republic, both before and after the Civil War. Before the Civil War, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, both former slaves, John Brown, a white anti-slavery leader, and many other abolitionists worked in multiracial cooperative businesses, actually a little west of here. Their belief was that black and white people, men and women, would learn how to treat each other with dignity and as equals when their form of day-to-day business was also grounded in equality and dignified treatment of workers. When the Civil Rights Movement emerged in the 1960s, it had many of the same hopes for black businesses that the abolitionists did. Black businesses funded the Civil Rights Movement when no one else would. And the dream of civil rights leaders was that black business would continue to put service to the community above the pure pursuit of money. And in fact, many black businesses have done that. Our forefathers and mothers, for the most part, didn't envision a private sector that crushed people, or a private sector that magnifies inequality in a mindless pursuit of never enough money, or a private sector that weakened workers' ability to participate in democracy. They imagined a private sector that lifted people up. Businesses that strengthen people's capacity for learning and cooperation, which are the basic elements for democracy. Every day on the job. This is what I mean by economic democracy. It's the struggle to make that a reality. But here's where I think Adam Smith got it wrong. First, capitalist society was constructed on the premise that work didn't generate profits, like raising young workers, kids, taking care of sick and old workers. Work like that would be done by slaves and women. Those who would make money and lead the private sector would be white men. We are still grappling with the implications of this initial construction today. It underlies the fight for dignity and decent pay for home care workers and many others. Righting the wrongs of our racist and patriarchal past has got to be a central mission of government's role in economic affairs. This is what I mean by activist government. We need an activist government and a democratization of our private sector. Finally, the genius of our system cannot be skillfully manipulating our worst human attributes, our selfish side and propensity for cruelty, to create and justify institutions. Humans are just as naturally cooperative and loving creatures as they are selfish or mean. Our next system needs to be one that skillfully nurtures and harnesses our better selves. Thank you.
Challenging, inspiring, and empowering. That's what Phil is all about. So thank you, Phil. This was just perfect. And I think it's the kind of talk that makes us feel that we can do something if we put our creative work together and use the coordination with equity in creative ways. So we have a few minutes, not a lot of time, but I would invite ideas. What does this mean to you? Where can you take the work that you are doing to address these issues? Coordination with equity, addressing deep-seated social problems in an integrated way, not to separate out health from housing, from racial equity and so on. Ideas. Let's hear from folks.
Start here.
Phil, thank you very much.
Just speak to it.
My question is, how do the horizontal, lateral, new organizing forms sit side by side with City Hall with hierarchies that we've inherited? So when Fortune magazine came out 2 months ago with its list of the 50 greatest leaders, it included #MeToo, #NeverAgain, the West Virginia teachers, the Olympic gymnasts. We could include Black Lives Matter, the 350 mayors that are still in the Paris Climate Accord, even when our president pulls out. Those are all lateral, non-hierarchical arrangements. What you talked about in Brownsville is the same. And so my question is, how do these new organizational forms fit with the inherited institutions?
Okay, so we'll collect a few if there are questions. I also want people to really suggest, what does this mean to me? What can we...
I think that's a so special opportunity and a very precious opportunity for me. I'm from China, Shanghai Jiaotong University, and China changed so greatly. I admire your ideas. The human being really are the oneness. We connect with each other for the white, the black, even yellow, or some other. The mankind, all of us are the human beings. I think we should be beneficial to all of us, and we should treat with each other with respect, with a wider coordination, relational coordination with mutual respect. I really admire that idea. And also in China, my research field is in healthcare system, and actually that integrate with each other so many different levels of healthcare, from the primary care, including the public health, and also beyond the individual, organization, personal or interpersonal, cross, different levels or organizational, institutional, etc. And beyond that, in China, actually, we integrate how to put them together, integrate with the primary care with the tertiary care, and also how to put, straight on the priority for the healthy food, the green, beautiful, environment, etc. All that could be so great to all our well-beings. So I think it's a so great group. I think creative ideas from Judy. I think that's if we could work together, make our world more beautiful and lovely. That's our responsibility. I hope all of you could come to China for have a visit. Our President Xi Jinping did stress on the shared goal, shared fate, shared, the benefit of that. We should create a better world for all of us. Thank you so much. I will give back my colleagues.
Thank you. So, challenging comment over here. And the integration of the systems in China where the cities are even bigger than New York is critical, and where you bring migrant workers into your industrial heartland is a good opportunity and a good challenge for addressing these issues.
My question relates to what had been said about the Medicaid agency and other state agencies or local agencies. You touched on a broad spectrum of interconnected issues and organizations. What I have to say about agencies such as Medicaid, state Medicaid agencies, I've seen utter discordance and dysfunction within agencies and across state agencies that should be working together. It hurts to see how many resources can be used more efficiently than they are. So that's my point from my personal experience. And so my question is, what is the state of affairs in New York as far as the Medicaid agency there as you move forward in your initiative?
Okay, so the question is, are the state agencies for Medicaid sharing the kind of vision that Phil articulated in a more integrated way? Maybe one more, and then let's ask Phil to comment. Yeah, let's take two real quick ones from the two hands that were up back here, and let's get both of them.
I just wanted to say thank you for sharing. At our healthcare system, we have a health equity scholar program and have come up with a lot of creative ideas where we bring groups in together to work on problems that are trying to create equity in healthcare. We were successful last year with a program, and it was very small though. So just walking away today, I want to come back and challenge our team. What more can we do to impact the results of that?
Fantastic. Good.
Thank you.
And the gentleman back.
I just was curious about how, from, say, the mayor's office, how do they see the relevance or usefulness of us still speaking as an academic and what we can do. So I was really struck by Dr. Thompson's reframing of Adam Smith, because it begins with the ideas, right? Or at the very least, there's ideas driving the practices that we see. And I believe, the root of the word professor is to profess, right? So what are we professing? And how can we flesh out those ideas, and are we making any impact at all?
Good. So that's a good segue back to Phil, since he lives in both worlds and has crossed that boundary very effectively. So your thoughts on these remarks?
Okay. So going to the earlier question of how do we integrate our big bureaucracies with these local community-driven initiatives, and the reason I put it out there is because we need you to help us figure out how to do this. We're doing experiments. We're starting an experiment in central Brooklyn with our Department of Education and community schools, with Medgar College, which is part of the city university system. I also oversee our community colleges and city university system. And with our workforce training programs and with our summer youth employment programs. And what we're trying to create is actually a system where young people are engaged year-round. And we're creating pathways so that what they're doing in the summer, we have 75,000 paid summer youth jobs, and these jobs will be connected to what they're learning in school and where they want to go in their careers, and it'll be an integrated process, And then if they want to go to college, there'll be a ladder right into Medgar Evers, and we'll work with the health sector, we'll work with the urban manufacturing sector, etc., so that the connections and ties are there. And so that's like one experiment, and we're going to do something similar in Staten Island. And so we're launching experiments. An experiment we did this summer was we trained several thousand youth through the summer youth program to be what I call it like the Peace Corps, but this is the Democracy Corps. So we trained them on what democracy is and how to organize. And next summer we want to have 10,000 doing that, because we want people to vote, we want people to participate, we want people to know how to organize meetings, we want people to fill out the census, because the Trump administration is trying to scare immigrants from even filling out the census. So we're building that fighting cadre of young people who can work in all these different organizations. That's another experiment. Another experiment is we want to create MOOCs on these kinds of issues, and the Department of Education will run the MOOCs through all our public schools, so we hit 1 million kids. And we'll run them through CUNY. So we hit another 500,000 young people, and we're creating a MOOC development center to really reform how we train people and make economic democracy part of the MOOC. So these are things. We're actively engaged in those. We have a City Hall study group, which has been meets on Wednesday mornings at 8:30, and a lot of folks come, and we study. We read articles by academics. We discuss them to get ideas and think through collectively what we're doing. It's been on hiatus because the mayor actually wants to think about this stuff, and I have to figure out how to put it in graphs, or he doesn't have a lot of time to read long articles. But he's into it, right? So that's what we're doing. We have to think. In terms of Medicaid and where it's heading right now at the state level and the federal level, with the Trump administration, they're trying to destroy the Affordable Care Act. They have no openness to funding any of the things that I was talking about, and so the situation is not good on that front. And we have to change our federal administration to really revive that in reality. However, we just had state elections and elected a lot of progressive folks. And so we're going to have, I think, a pretty progressive state senate for the first time in decades, and a progressive state assembly, and a governor who's decided to move to the left in his quest to do something else. And so we think we'll have a good atmosphere in the state to try and get some funding to continue these things outside of Medicare. And I also want to say, I was talking about New York, but we are also very engaged. I am with Andrew Gillum, who's the Democratic nominee for governor of Florida. African American, was mayor of Tallahassee, became mayor after he occupied the governor's office for a month with other students protesting the shooting of Trayvon Martin. That's who's running for governor of Florida, and he's leading at the moment. That is transformative, and he wants to do this kind of stuff. Stacey Abrams, African American woman, is the nominee for governor of Georgia, of all places. She wants to do this kind of stuff. The senator elected from Alabama, Jones, was recruited by a movement of black women who ran the campaign and defeated Trump's candidate in Alabama. That's happening now. Mike Espy is running for the Senate in Mississippi and is doing well, might win. Ben Jealous is running for governor of Maryland. There's a very progressive guy running for the Senate in Texas. These are deep, traditionally very red conservative states, but there's a movement happening, which is why I referred to my talk as a movement. It's not just New York. We do talk to each other. Ayanna Pressley's campaign was run by someone who was on my staff 5 months ago. She was just elected to Congress. People said she couldn't win. Traditional Democrats came up to try and stop a momentum of low-income women of color. Why is that? But guess what? They lost by 18 points. It tells you something, which I find really exciting. So I'm not dispirited. I believe Trump is a reaction to what's rising in the country. It is not our future. You know, we're going to have a fight. We are in a fight. But guess what? Let's have the fight. Okay? Let's fight. Let's have the fight.
So we have our marching orders. I think that's a good thing to think about. Keep this conversation going over lunch. You have a limited amount of time to discuss this with each other. You gain strength from the kind of dialogue that you can have here over the next day. So I think there are some directions for lunch that might be provided. But Phil, thank you again.